Hey, everybody. Hope you all have been having a wonderful week or looking forward to a great weekend. I am just sharing this link in a few places and I'll be ready to rock and roll. All right. Oh, one more place. Gotta get the Discord. All right, there we go. Hey, everybody. Peace indeed. Hope y'all are doing all right. Been a bit since don't recognize that number. Been a bit since I've been live. Chris, thank you for pre-ordering the book. I appreciate that very much. I don't know how these trade books go, but it's been exciting, and I'm looking forward to this process. And I'm really looking forward to when they're going to get me out on a promotional tour. I think that'll be a lot of fun. LOL, is there a quick way to make people understand what the Bible meant by logos? Not really, because that's such a loaded term that meant so much and could mean different things to different groups. So yeah, I don't think there's a quick and easy way, but a straightforward gloss would be word, thing, issue, thought, something like that. Coy, thank you for ordering the book. Lynn, thank you for ordering the book. I appreciate it very much. Whether you got I haven't recorded the audio book yet. That's probably going to happen starting in February. So that'll be out by the 29th when everything else goes out. I hope you enjoy it. Hey, Dan, what's going on with the spirits in prison passage in 1 Peter 3:19? Is this a reference to Enoch? Yes, this is the Enochic tradition, the idea that there were disobedient angels, and the disobedient angels had children with human women, and those were the giants, and I think they gave their children, their offspring were the Nephilim, and then when they died, their spirits became the evil spirits. And so, long, complex story, but there were it's based on the Enochic tradition. Hey, Dan, tuning in from Aotearoa. Logan, welcome. Thank you for being here. Hope hope everything's treating you well down there in Aotearoa, a place I've always wanted to visit. I hope I'm able to make it out there at some point. Alex says, just stopping by to say hello and thank you for the book recommendations. I'm a teacher in middle school, and your book recommendations have helped me be a better teacher. Well, I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you for letting me know. That means a lot. If I can help people learn better, improve their relationships, understand other people better, become better teachers, I couldn't really ask for anything more. Any thoughts on the Colburn Bible? I'm not familiar with that one. Hey, Dan, which book of the Bible do you find fascinating? I find several of them fascinating. I've always loved Deuteronomy. I've always loved Exodus and Genesis. I've found Judges fascinating in a lot of different ways. The Psalms fascinate me as well. And then my favorite gospel is got to be Mark. Revelation I find bizarre and fascinating as well. So there are a lot of them. I hear squawking coming from the other room, and I hope it's just my daughter singing. I think that's what it was. Connor, thank you for the question. What is the anthropological reasons for why traditional religions ban homosexuality? It almost certainly originates in what is called a disgust sensitivity, which is a cognitive orientation towards pathogens and contamination. We all have different ways that our body responds negatively to things that our minds perceive to be contamination. And so there's a sexual disgust sensitivity, scale. And so some people have a higher degree of that than others. If you don't have experience around LGBTQ plus folks, then you probably have not conditioned that to, or you probably have not have experiences that help you to mitigate that sensitivity. In smaller groups where there are more salient, costly signals that you're required to put on display in order to demonstrate your fidelity to the group. Sometimes sexual disgust sensitivity can be a very big identity marker. And so today within conservative Christian and other religious traditions, that tends to be an identity marker. So it's something that starts on the individual level, but once it becomes something that is shared socially as something that our group doesn't like, then it takes on a different kind of orientation. It becomes something that's socially embedded. And that's when you have people who might actually not have that sensitivity endorsing that bigotry because it's necessary for them to structure power and values to protect and improve their standing within the social group. And so it comes down to some kind of innate cognitive things combined with some social pressures, particularly having to do with in-group, out-group dynamics and things like that. John Day was pretty skeptical on Enuma Elish's influence on Genesis 1, preferring instead Psalm 104 and some sort of shared tradition or lost text we're not privy to. Pete Enns seems pretty convinced, as do other scholars I've read. Carr, if I recall correctly, believes Enuma Elish influenced Genesis 1. Any perspective you hold there? I am on the side of thinking that Enuma Elish is exercising some kind of influence, but it's not telling Genesis 1 what to do. But Genesis 1 is crafted so as to respond to and kind of reflect while also critiquing what's going on in Enuma Elish. David Samora has written on this, Chaos and Creation. He's skeptical that the Chaos Kampf makes it through into Genesis. I think I'm not quite as sold as those who think that there's this direct full borrowing, or those who think that it has no influence whatsoever. I think there's definitely some kind of influence, but I also think the Genesis authors are pushing back. And for those of you who are not aware, there is a brand new Anchor Yale Bible commentary volume on Genesis 1 through 11 that discusses that as well. Shamgar Zoxcode says, just want to say I'm looking forward to your new book. Well, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to it too. This is the... Oh, there it is. This is the mock-up of the book, The Bible Says So, What We Get Right and Wrong About Scripture's Most Controversial Issues. So when people are talking about a new book in this live, this is what they're talking about. This will be out April 29th. And so, yeah, I'm excited to see this out in the world. And I think I just have one more round of proofs to approve, and then it goes into press. Simone Bat-Yochai says, hi, Dan, congrats on the book. Thank you so much. I've got another annoyingly specific question asking for book recommendations. Anything for the history of Messianic thought from the Greco-Roman period on? I've got Collins, The Scepter and the Star, Idell's Messianic Mystics, and all the stuff Scholem wrote, but I'd like some more that incorporates Christian perspectives or more recent stuff I may have missed. I would suggest Fitzmyers, The One Who Is to Come. Oh, I don't have the full cover. I just have the... This is maybe a bit out of date. Let me see. Share the screen. So this is from 2007. We've got starting in the Hebrew Bible, then we're going to get into Greco-Roman period Jewish stuff. And then into the New Testament, and then the Mishnah, Targums, and other rabbinic writings. So that's one that I think does a good job. Collins and Collins, so John and his wife also did one. You didn't mention it there, but they did King and Messiah as Son of God, which is, there we go, divine, human, and angelic messianic figures in biblical and related literature, which is from 2008, and that's going to also, that's going to focus a little bit more on New Testament stuff. Let's see. Booner's book, Messianic High Christology, New Testament Variants of Second Temple Judaism, tries to reconfigure our understanding of early Christian Messianism, particularly in the New Testament, by grounding it more in early Jewish Messianism. So that might also have some stuff to say. Let's see. See if I have anything more recent. This is probably one of the newer things. Matt Novenson, let's see if this is a book or if this is just an article. The Grammar of Messianism, Novenson from 2017, an ancient Jewish political idiom and its users. Novenson was for a time the doctoral supervisor of my very good friend, David Burnett. Yeah, so different kinds of Messianism, Jewish, early Christianity, grammar of Messianism. So yeah, you've got, I think those are a number of texts that could probably get you down the right road. Crispy said, thank you so much for the comment. Here, have money. I appreciate that. I can't get through thick scholarly books, but I want to show my support. Well, luckily, this my new book is not a thick scholarly book. It is written for a general audience. So my publisher was like, basically transcribe your videos, and that's how we want the voice to sound in this book. And that took some work to get consistent at, but hopefully I struck the right chord. Question: do you nerd out as hard about other fictional works, comics, etc., as you do the Bible? Which comic do you know the best? Sometimes, not nearly as much. Which comic do I know the best? Spawn and the death, reign and life of Superman, all that early to mid 90s stuff. That's when I just dove into comics. So those are some of the story arcs that I'm most familiar with. But I'm getting back into things. I've subscribed to Capullo's Wolverine Revenge series. I've been to several cons over the last couple of months, so I picked up a bunch of Man Without Fear stuff, picked up a bunch of Wolverine back issues. So it's been a while since I've been out of the game, but I'm trying to get back into it. I don't know that I nerd out nearly as much on comics. Yeah, I would have to say probably not. But great question. Thank you so much. Connor, could you go into detail on the author of Matthew being a Judaizer? So throughout the Gospel of Matthew, the idea seems to be that everybody's got to follow the law. We see in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5 that not one jot or tittle of the law will fail until heaven and earth pass away, until all is fulfilled. And Jesus says, I came not to destroy, but to fulfill. Anyone who does not keep one of the least of these laws or teaches others, or I forget the exact wording, but whoever breaks one of the least of these and teaches others to do so will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But the one who keeps all of the laws will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. And then says, your righteousness must exceed the righteousness of the Pharisees. and then says, you have read that Moses said this, but I say this, and it's an escalation of the severity of the law. So we don't get the idea anywhere in Matthew that the law is going away. What we get is that you still have to follow the law, only we're escalating it. And so even in the, not just in the sermons, when Jesus like confronts some folks and says, you tithe your mint and cumin and dill, but you leave the weightier matters of the law undone. You should do the other thing, or you should pay attention to the weightier matters of the law without leaving the other undone. In other words, you still should be doing the tithing as well. So every time Jesus or the author of Matthew gets the opportunity to say something about the law going away, they don't. They emphasize the continued relevance of the law. So that has led to the view that Matthew was a Judaizer, was not in the Pauline camp of this is no longer relevant anymore. But I have not written on that specifically, so I can't go too deep into a lot of the details of the discussion. But that's a wonderful question. Thank you. Hayden Tank says, I was actually just looking at that Collins book. It talks a bit about how the Hebrew Bible author saw David and other kings as deified to some extent. Yep, I think Lewis pushed back on that view to an extent. Which side do you come down on? There's definitely a deification going on to some degree. We've got Psalm 45 where it says, I address my words to the king, and then says, oh God, and says, oh God, your God. So there's a explicit vocative address of the king as God. And that would have been kind of par for the course in that time period. So yeah, I think there's a type of deification going on. Was the Bible ever used in U.S. schools? Yes. In the 19th century, the Bible was used an awful lot to teach English. So yeah, it was absolutely being used. Is there data that it would help or hurt if put there now? In many public schools, there are elective courses that let you study the Bible. And there are many, and from a literary perspective, Bible as literature. In college, there are tons of Bible as literature classes. I think it would be helpful. I think it is an influential text that people need to know about, but I don't think that most public schools have the capacity to be able to competently teach a critical look at the Bible as literature. But like requiring a physical copy in every classroom is asinine. That is just using it as an icon. That is not accomplishing anything other than saying, this is who's in charge of this space. It is an idol there to show you who's in charge and nothing else. Because you don't have to have a physical Bible in a classroom to teach about the Bible or even to teach from the Bible. Thank you for the question, though. Beekman, man, remember Beekman's World? Hi, what insights can you provide about applying your methodology to the Quran, given it's pretty much a reboot of the entire Abrahamic tradition? So there's not a ton of critical study of the Quran, but there have been some things that have come out. I don't know the names of critical Quran scholars off the top of my head, but there have been, like, for instance, there was a book published a couple years ago that was a linguistic, and this is an open access book. You could go online and you can find the PDF of this. Quranic Arabic from its Hijazi origins to its classical reading traditions. So it's a Brill publisher, but it's open access, and it's quite technical. But a lot of discussion about how the manuscripts preserve different phases in the development of Quranic Arabic. So it pretty interesting book. There've been some discussions of textual criticism, but they're not a ton, because it's not something that's very popular within the institutions that are producing the most scholars of Qumran studies. So yeah, it's out there. There's not as much space for it, though. But hopefully that's changing. Hopefully that space is increasing. Sarah, is there likely to be a paperback version? Yes, the paperback version will come out 1 year after the hardcover version is published. Yeah, in fact, that's the last disbursement of my advance will come once the paperback is out. So it better come out. Sky Larson, thank you so much for the comment. Appreciate all you do. Well, thank you for the kind words. Board game designer here. Do you play any board games? We play some board games in our family. It's been a while, but we love Ticket to Ride. We have some different Seen It. Seen It? Is it Seen It, or is it? There's like a Disney version of something where you get different. There's a big, large board with a bunch of scenes all over it, and then you're supposed to spot, a cat or an apple or something like that. And in many places you can. It might not be Seen It, might be something else. And then I'm a big fan of. I have 3 girls, aged 7 to 15, and so we don't do like Trivial Pursuit type stuff, but I've always been a fan of that kind of stuff. So that's the vibe I get, but it might just be all the comic stuff. I enjoy video. I don't enjoy video games. I used to enjoy video games, but ever since 007 GoldenEye, I haven't been able to play video games. But I enjoy board games, but I'm in that period in life where I don't have time for anything but wife and children, and so I don't have opportunities to be around other people my own age to get together and play board games that are intellectually stimulating. But I've done D&D, so I have done some tabletop role-playing games, but I haven't gotten deep enough into it to say I'm really good at it or experienced. But thank you for a great question. Tevona, thank you so much. Hi, Dr. Dan. Hi, Tevona. I hope I'm saying that right. I heard a man teaching that veganism was demonic based on 1 Timothy 4:3. Is this true? Right off the bat, I can say no. But let's see what 1 Timothy 4:3 says. They forbid marriage and abstain from certain foods which God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. So this is probably a reference to a specific movement within probably a specific Christian movement, isn't it? Now, the Spirit expressly says that in later times some will renounce the faith by paying attention to deceitful spirits and teachings of demons through the hypocrisy of liars whose consciences are seared with a hot iron. They forbid marriage and abstain, blah, 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 blah. I'm trying to think if there's an actual group that this characterizes. But in addition to the fact that this is pseudo-Pauline, this wasn't written by Paul. This was written by somebody who was pretending to be Paul decades after his death. So they don't really have authority here. Let me pull up a commentary that I think generally does a really good job and see if they identify a specific movement with this. Because the forbidding of like veganism isn't like, I'm sure there are folks who approach it as more of a religious thing, but for the most part, it has nothing to do with Christian traditions. Although I have heard some people, I have seen a video, I didn't respond to it, but I got tagged in a video where somebody said something like, once you understand Jesus's teachings, you can't eat meat anymore. Let me see if I can find the verse real quick. That's chapter 3 still. There's chapter 4. What are we looking at? Verse 3. Having cited asceticism with regard to sex and diet as a consequence of the end-time activity of the deceitful spirits and demons, the pastor offers a reflection on how Christians should regard sex and food. A relative clause states that God has created food to be received and enjoyed, blah, blah. So yeah, early Christianity was frequently characterized by pretty strict asceticism. I mean, Paul can kind of be characterized that way. So just any movement that says, hey, you shouldn't eat this particular kind of food, saying that's demonic is pretty silly. I mean, even in the book of Acts, they say don't eat blood, don't eat things strangled. An asceticism that derives from Gnosticizing dualism may well be an important piece of the problem confronted in the pastoral epistles. The patristic text and the Acts of Paul show that issues of sex and marriage were a matter of heated debate among second century Christians. The church of the first century was, however, not innocent of debates about food and sex. The epistolary warnings of the book of Revelation suggest that some Christians were lax in regard to restraint of the appetites for food and sex. Revelation associates this excess with the teaching of Balaam and the Nicolaitans. So, yeah, trying to transfer that into today to just say, oh, that's vegans, that's pretty asinine, because veganism is not a Christian denomination. So, yeah, I don't think that makes much sense. Patreon tier for a fairly casual gaming session with Dan. That could be fun. I was at Dragon Con, and I went around exploring the gaming building, which was something I've never seen before. It was pretty cool. Yeah, I was kind of walking around. My thought was, I'll just see what's going on, and if anybody wants to say, anybody recognizes me and says, hey, come join our game, I'll be happy to join the game. But while some people did recognize me, nobody invited me to come play. Holiday themed question: what is your favorite holiday, and is Halloween frowned upon within mainstream Mormonism? I would have to say my favorite holiday is Christmas. I just think that I have the best memories and the best feelings associated with that time of the year. And Halloween frowned upon within mainstream Mormonism? Not really. Certainly not to the degree a lot of Christian nationalists and more fundamentalist Christian groups go to. Like, they have something they call trunk or treat in a lot of Mormon congregations here in the States, where they'll get together and people will dress up and they'll be in the parking lot of the church building, and the trunks will be open and they'll have their things of candy in the trunks, and it's basically a way to kind of keep everything contained, and everybody just goes from car trunk to car trunk, and they call it the Fall Festival. They usually in the messaging they don't use Halloween. So, there's some kind of light. We try not to use Halloween, but it's pretty silly. Nobody takes it incredibly seriously. Jordan, thank you so much for the question. How do you balance scholarship and person devotion? That's something that I have always said is not in bounds for my social media content, because once I start talking about that, that's what everybody's going to want to talk about. That's what everybody's going to want to critique and interrogate and question. And so that's just out of bounds. I stick to the scholarship and the data. I have a master's in theology from Perkins at SMU. My sister did most or all. I think she finished her PhD at SMU. It's a great place. Well, it's a great school. Ever since church makes me nuts. Love your work. I can understand the sentiment. And I'm sorry if you don't feel like you're part of that community anymore. But yeah, unfortunately, that's not a question I'm able to answer on social media. And people sometimes think that if they catch me in private, that the door's open, but I usually avoid that as well. That's just something that I keep compartmentalized, and I'm not comfortable with using it socially or publicly as a way to get attention or get on people's good sides or whatever. So that's a question I get asked every single day, but always have to say sorry, I'm not going to be able to answer that. So I'm sorry I couldn't fully answer your question. Surf for Life MD, thank you so much for the question. Hey Dan, I just want to say I absolutely love what you do. Thank you so much for the kind words. I appreciate it. Also, I am nearly done creating a Bible trivia board game and would love to send you a copy. I would be honored to have a copy. I would love to see what that board game is like, because a lot of the Bible trivia stuff I see, I'm like, probably should have consulted somebody about that. But I'd be interested to see what that looks like. And yeah, find a way to message me or something, and I'll get a PO box to you. Aharon Shlomo, thank you so much for the question. Hello from London. Oh, London, wonderful place. I was just there a year ago. Oh man, it's been a year since I've been to London. This is going to be like the first year in over a decade where I have not left the United States, and that's a bit depressing to think about. Congrats for the new book. Thank you so much. Will your new book be more focused on Torah, OT, or NT? Thanks. It will be. It's, I think, a pretty good balance of both. And I will show you just a second. I will show you the table of contents. And I will discuss how they're going to talk about both Hebrew Bible and New Testament. Let's see. Let's get this a little smaller. Not that small. Okay, hopefully that works. So Bible is inspired. That's going to be primarily New Testament. Bible says God created the universe out of nothing. That's going to be that's going to start in the Hebrew Bible and overwhelmingly be talking about the Hebrew Bible, but probably the last 20% of that chapter is going to be about New Testament, early Christianity. Bible said God lies. That's going to be overwhelmingly Hebrew Bible. Bible says slavery is wrong. That's going to be probably 60 to 70% Hebrew Bible, 30 to 40% New Testament. Bible says God has a wife. That's going to be pretty much entirely Hebrew Bible. Bible says abortion is murder. That's going to be mostly Hebrew Bible, but a little New Testament. Bible says rape victims must marry their rapists. That's going to be about Deuteronomy 22. Bible says Satan is God's enemy. Going to start talking about the Hebrew Bible. That's actually mostly going to be about Greco-Roman period Jewish literature, so deuterocanonical stuff like that, Enoch. Those kinds of texts. Bible says God has a body. That's going to be mostly Hebrew Bible, some New Testament. Bible says to sacrifice your firstborn child. It's going to be almost entirely Hebrew Bible. Bible says you should beat your kids. That's going to be about Proverbs. Bible says there's only one God. That's probably 75% Hebrew Bible, 25% New Testament. Bible says homosexuality is an abomination. That's going to be probably half and half. I talk about a handful of different texts for the Hebrew Bible section, making up half the chapter. Then the other half is mostly about just a couple of passages in Paul, mainly Romans 1. Bible says women need to cover up, about half and half. Bible says Messiah would be born of a virgin. That's going to be mostly about Isaiah 7:14, but I'm going to talk about the Septuagint and Matthew. So going to be a little New Testament stuff in there as well. Now let's get to the other page of the table of contents. Boop. Okay, Bible says Jesus is God. Obviously, it's going to be mostly New Testament, but it's probably going to be about 10 to 20% Hebrew Bible / Greco-Roman period Jewish literature. Bible says to beware the mark of the beast is going to be mostly about Revelation. Bible says sinners will be punished forever in hell. To talk a little bit about Hebrew Bible, quite a bit about Book of Enoch, and then the rest will be New Testament. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the split. So yeah, I would say it's probably going to be almost half, almost 50-50. If there's a bias, it might be a little toward the Hebrew Bible side. But yeah, I haven't counted up the words. So I can't give you a much more detailed answer than that, but hopefully that's a pretty detailed answer for you. But thank you for a wonderful question. Is there any source criticism scholarship available for the Bible says? Who are the best scholars who can tease apart the influences of this ancient work of wisdom? There are, well, I think anybody who has seen my social media videos is going to be able to say, I remember the video that talks about that. I remember the video that talks about that. And then also I have little anecdotes at the beginning of each chapter, which are mostly about some interaction on social media that introduces the question. So you're going to be able to say, I remember when he said that or did that, or I remember when he responded to that video or something like that. Or I remember that clown who used to say that kind of stuff. Milcom Kemosh, thank you so much for the question. Did Solomon's temple exist? There was probably, there was a first temple. scholars are in widespread agreement about that. Built by Solomon, that's a little less secure, but there definitely was a first temple that was probably constructed somewhere in the early first millennium BCE. So I would say a first temple, yes. A first temple built by Solomon, I don't think we can say that with too much certainty. Follow-up of holiday-themed question, Data over Dogma, how Christians conceptualize different holidays over time. That would be fascinating because it's also different from place to place. Like people in the US who've never been out of the country think that everybody does everything just like the US, and they don't. My first Christmas in South America, in Uruguay, one was the middle of summer. Two, it's entirely different down there. They set off fireworks at midnight. Like everybody in the entire nation sets off fireworks at midnight on Christmas. And leading up to it, you have kids in the street with a little like makeshift effigy they call the huda, and they collect and they like use it to beg for money to then go buy fireworks. And then they're going to like blow up or set on fire the huda as part of the Christmas celebration. Is it in Hong Kong or Japan? I think it's in Hong Kong. They celebrate Christmas with cake and KFC. And, the traditions are different all over the place. And yeah, they change significantly throughout time. And I think a lot of people would be surprised at how recent a lot of the conventions that we have always associated with these holidays actually are. So yeah, that would be fun to do. Anthony Crossland, thank you so much for the question. As a scientist, I'm frustrated by the prevalence of conservative Christians who haven't read the entire Bible. I am as well. What is your cognitive science of religion perspective? Thanks for all you do, Dan. Thank you so much for the kind words. From the cognitive science of religion perspective, I would say that the Bible functions frequently as more of an icon than as an actual constitution for people to follow, because it only has meaning when you read it, and everybody reads it through interpretive lenses. And those interpretive lenses are a bigger part of the negotiation of meaning than the text itself. And within certain religious traditions, those traditional lenses are very, very dogmatic. And so you have to arrive at certain understandings. And so people read the Bible for a bunch of different reasons, and frequently it is just to affirm the interpretive lenses that they're imposing upon the text. It's not to try to better understand the Bible. And frequently people are disincentivized from reading the whole thing because they're supposed to focus on certain parts of it. And it's only folks who are really committed to digging in fully and trying to get the experience of reading the whole thing that take the time to do that. And frequently they skip over stuff. I know folks who have been like, oh, I read the whole Bible. And it's like, oh, well, tell me about this part of Leviticus. They're like, I skipped over that. Because it's not easy to do, and it's not relevant for a lot of Christians. But within conservative Christianity, the more conservative they are, the less likely they are to okay, sorry. My 7-year-old with a friend right outside my window in the front yard was coughing, but they're just playing. They're not crying. Okay. So yeah, the more conservative, the more dogmatic they are, the less they are going to care about what the Bible actually says. And so I think the less they're going to take the time to read through all of it. But yeah, I don't think there's been a ton of research on that within the cognitive science of religion. I would like to take a look at that. I would like to talk with some colleagues about that and see if we can't get some more research going in that direction. Thank you for a great question. Infinite Stories, thank you so much for a very generous question. Thank you for your public scholarship. Well, thank you. I appreciate the kind words. Saw your D&D t-shirt in a TikTok the other day. How have tabletop role-playing games inspired, informed, or complicated your understanding of mythological/religious monsters? There's a great book by Esther Hamori. Hang on just a second. Called God's Monsters. Vengeful spirits, deadly angels, hybrid creatures, and divine hitmen of the Bible, which is a phenomenal discussion, very accessible. I wish I could write the way that Esther does. It's very engaging, it's very clever, and funny. I think it's just the fact that you're kind of developing these characters, and there are kind of canonical monsters and characters within these games, has just it's in a way it's given me a template for thinking about how sometimes people go about creating imagery, particularly apocalyptic imagery, because it's very similar, where they want to create characters, they want to create literary imagery that's going to evoke certain emotions, certain feelings, certain reactions, very much the same way that in some of these tabletop role-playing games, folks create their monsters and other things to do. So it's another manifestation of, I think, a very similar kind of social phenomenon, a way of trying to evoke certain emotions, certain responses, certain thoughts in people's heads. And so I think it adds to the kind of repertoire of ways to think about how people are creating the stories that they're creating, that we see in the Bible, in other literature. But the apocalyptic literature of Second Temple Judaism is second to none when it comes to the creation of those creatures and that imagery. And Revelation is a good example of it. The book of Daniel is another interesting example of it. And people are like, wow, they must have been incredibly high. It's like, not necessarily. They just wanted to evoke certain emotions, and so they use the literary tools at their disposal to do so. And I think with some of those role-playing games, they're doing very similar things. But that's an interesting question. I'll have to think a little bit more about that. See if I can come up with more thoughts. Hand of Omega, thank you so much for the question. What's the Bible actually say about tithing? I know folks who give more than they can afford. Must they, even if it hurts them? Are there verses against this? So in tithing is based on a word that means tenth. So technically it's just supposed to be a tenth, but you have different versions of it that you find in different parts of particularly the Pentateuch. And so within some early Jewish traditions, they actually stacked them. So you had like 30% that was required of you, which most scholars would say was never actually what was ever intended. We did an episode on tithing for the Data Over Dogma podcast. It was episode 76, which was published September 16th. So just for a month ago. So I think there was my thoughts were a little more organized for that episode than they're going to be now. But you do have a few different places that talk about tithing. The book of Acts, the end of chapter 4, beginning of verse 5, obviously talks about something very different. And so folks who say, oh, you got to give even if it hurts them, yeah, that's just greed going on there. Tithing isn't something that, and I talk about this a little bit in the episode. The tithing went to different institutions as time went on, as institutions grew and changed, and some of them no longer needed to be funded through tithing. And so the tithing was developed for something else. And there are even parts of the Bible where you're supposed to take the 10% to the temple, and then you eat it there yourself. So you're paying the tithing, you're taking the tithing to the temple, but you're consuming the tithing yourself. So it's not univocal. There's no one rule apart from the fact that it's just based on the concept of 1/10, and elsewhere, particularly within Christian traditions, it becomes something entirely different. So anyone who says that they're enforcing the biblical approach to tithing doesn't know what they're talking about. There is no one biblical approach to tithing. So yeah, I get. I would say that tithing is something that these days is more practical than anything else, whether it's someone just trying to line their own pockets or an institution that is trying to raise funds so that they can go out and fulfill goals that they have for different kinds of programs and charities and social things like that. I think there can be good ways to use tithing, but at the same time, frequently it's just about bringing in the Benjamins. Connor, thank you for the question. Did Augustine popularize hell as eternal torture? Augustine was certainly a popularizer of it. I think, yes, the early church fathers are primarily responsible for cementing the notion of eternal conscious torment as the version of post-mortem divine punishment that we're going to put front and center. Augustine was a big proponent of that, but it's still developing, and it's still changing throughout the medieval period and later. And these days, our conceptualization of it is primarily built on the literary foundation of like Italian authors that had a lot to say about different levels of hell and stuff like that. So, but yeah, Augustine was a big part of that, no doubt. Caleb, thank you so much for the question. Hi, Danzo. Thank you for all you do. It's been paradigm shifting for me. That means a lot. Thank you for the kind words. Can you speak to why dogma gets its hooks into people/culture so easily? It has to do with social identities, and dogmas are when there are beliefs and conventions and things that become cemented as identity markers within social identities. And the more important social identities are to people, the easier it is for there to be identity markers that they accept without question. And so dogmas are like that. Those are beliefs that you have to sign off on to be a faithful, good standing member of the social identity. And ever since like Nicaea, and then again with the Protestant Reformation, the notion that that being a good Christian is about endorsing the right set of belief propositions has been central to Christian identities. So so these days, most Protestant denominations, it's all about which beliefs are necessary to be a part of our group. But yeah, it basically has to do with, are you in or are you out? How you got to show to us that you're a good member of our group. And the way they do that, particularly within Protestant Christianity, is endorse our truth claims and our truth propositions. And thank you for a great question. Scooter24, thank you so much. Hi, Dan. What do you make of the idea of the perpetual virginity being defended by the brothers of Jesus being Joseph's from a previous marriage? That's I think it's a tradition that develops within some early Christian apocryphal texts. The Proto-Evangelium or Proto-Gospel of James, for instance, is one of the popularizers of that notion that and other texts that, for instance, Joseph was like a 90-year-old man and had all these children from another marriage and blah, blah, blah. There are no data that point to the historicity of those traditions. Those are traditions that developed as ways of explaining away other concerns that develop. And I've talked in the past about the life cycle of religious dogmas. Dogmas tend to pop up kind of arbitrarily as people raise questions about things, and then they come up with answers that become authoritative. But once you have an authoritative answer, then it cascades across the rest of the tradition, and other questions pop up, and they need answers. But once you have like an institution and an actual system, then you have to make sure your answers work within the rest of the system. And so you'll find that a lot of dogmas are just chasing down the implications of other dogmas that then require you come up with additional dogmas to chase down the implications of those dogmas. So yeah, there are no data that support the historicity of that tradition. Seth, thank you. Seth, thank you for the question. How do cognitive attitudes interact with our intuitive reflective cognition? Thank you for everything you do. Thank you so much for the kind words and for the question. So the intuitive reflective cognition is a part of our cognitive attitude, but everybody's cognitive architecture is different based on evolution, based on where we are born, where we grow up, how we grow up. If we're an only child, if we have brothers and sisters, things like that can influence the development of our cognition in infancy and growing up. And there are arguments that there are, like Jonathan Haidt has endorses this notion that there are different domains, cognitive domains that we're concerned for when it comes to things like morality and things like that. And you might have a higher or a lower score in one of these domains than other people. I don't know that it's so systematic. Hang on just a second. But a lot of the cognitive attitudes are going to fall kind of in that overlap between the intuitive and the reflective cognition. It's a spectrum. It's not a dichotomy. And so on the intuitive side, there are things that are not revisable. We can't change. These are the evolutionarily installed things that are not going to go away. And then that kind of slowly gives way to the cognition that we can control. And cognitive attitudes that differ are going to kind of be in that overlap. And so conditioning can change them. But yeah, they kind of go back and forth. So they're in that bit of plasticity that's open to revision. All right, sorry, I'm texting with my wife. And I think I've recommended it in the past, but I think a really good introduction to the cognitive science of religion that anyone interested in the field should definitely check out is Claire White's An Introduction to the Cognitive Science of Religion, which is going to talk about this to some degree, connecting evolution, brain, cognition, and culture. But thank you for a great question. Haven't had to think about that for a while. Definitely need to get back into that literature. A seer, thank you so much for the question. Why do Mormons think blacks have mark of Cain? This has to do with 19th century ideas about the curse of Ham and finding other things in the Bible that can back up and corroborate that. Let me, and when it comes to Curse of Ham, I think the two best books on this, both by David Goldenberg, excuse me, are the following. The Curse of Ham, Race and Slavery in Early Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and Black and Slave, The Origins and History of the Curse of Ham. This one's from 2003. This one is from 2017. But those are some of the best discussions, and they're going to talk quite a bit about 19th century ideas about that. And you do have a reflection of an idea that an indirect kind of wink at the Curse of Ham idea with the Book of Abraham, where you have somebody who goes off and is associated with Ham, who is in Egypt. Beekman, thank you so much for another question. Wow, you know about Beekman's world. Yeah, I was born in 80. I grew up with that stuff. With data over dogma as a maxim, at some point the dogma one chooses to believe will be at odds with the data. Yes. How can one proceed as a believer? That's up to them. There are a lot of different ways that folks have tried to make that work. I think folks like Pete Enns and other people do a wonderful job of helping people to navigate the life of a faithful person who is a believer. But yeah, it usually comes down to some kind of compartmentalization, deciding that the methodologies that you use for certain kinds of certain domains of inquiry are going to be different from other things. But yeah, people sometimes find ways to make it work, and other people do not. But I'm not a person who has any advice to give other people about that kind of thing. But yeah, I would recommend Pete Enns has a handful of great books on that talk about the interaction of faith and scholarship. And then when it comes to like evangelicals and critical biblical scholarship, there's a book called God's Word in Human Words by L. Kenton Sparks, and the subtitle is An Evangelical Appropriation of Critical Biblical Scholarship, which tries to make the case that there is room for critical biblical scholarship and evangelical belief. You just have to jettison a lot of the identity politics and a lot of the dogmas of not of evangelical belief, but of apologetics and things like that. All right, I've got about 10 more minutes. I'm going to try to get through as many of these questions as I can. Somebody asked, how many times is inspiring philosophy mentioned in the book? Pretty sure 0 times. Yep. I'm pretty sure 0 times. I don't think I ever wrote that name in the book. Leslie, thank you so much for the question. What were the authors of the Gospels, especially Matt? Excuse me, having trouble reading with this eye right now. Were the authors of the Gospels, especially Matt, aware of Paul's writings, seeing that Jesus' teachings on salvation differ from Paul's? This is something that's discussed by a lot of different scholars. Most of them think that to some degree they were aware of Paul's works, at least the genuine Pauline writings. The degree to which they're interacting with them or those writings influence their texts, that is debatable. But I think it's likely that they were aware of Paul's writings. And we have, I think that's, I don't know that I can say much more than that. I'm certainly not a specialist on that argument. IDK 4003, thank you so much for the question. What do you think of Jack Logan in ancient tradition? I don't know. Jack Logan, let me put that up. Ancient, oh, I know this. This is ringing a bell. Somebody reached out to me about this at some point. And I don't know if somebody was saying, hey, you should check out this podcast, or I don't think somebody was asking me to appear on the podcast. Yeah, I have seen that website before. I have seen that podcast before. I'm not a big podcast person though, so I don't really listen to podcasts. I think the one time I listened to an entire 60-minute podcast was because somebody said, hey, what do you think about so-and-so's comments about you on this podcast? And I was like, I didn't know anything about this. So I went and listened to an entire 60-minute podcast. Like I'm not a big podcast person, but I would have to look a little deeper into it. I think I poked around the website and was like, looks to be a hobbyist who is trying sincerely to explore these things to the best of their ability. But I don't know much more than that. Hand of Omega, thank you for the question. When Satan tempts Jesus, was this a holdover from his old role as tester? You passed the test of power. Check. Next. There's an argument to make for that. but I think that I think that there's probably a tradition that this story, of which this story is tagging the base, um, more so than this is an opportunity to have Satan play this role. But certainly, Satan's role as tempter is a part of the divine profile of the Satan in uh, this part in the first century CE. So it's definitely Satan in their wheelhouse, doing what Satan does in this time period. But the New Testament is also kind of innovating Satan as a name, as an individual figure, because in the earlier literature you have like the head malevolent divine angel, but Satan is more like the word devil, in that you have the Satan and you have plural Satans, just like you can have the devil and you can have devils. Satan was more like that in earlier periods. And then it's in the New Testament where Satan suddenly becomes an actual personal name. T-Tum Zero, thank you so much for the question. What is your reading schedule like, Mr. Dan? I don't read as much these days as I would like, but once I try to get 2 videos out every day. Try to get them done as soon as I can in the morning, and then usually the rest of the morning until 11 a.m. when I have lunch, I'm either reading or writing. And right now, I've got to get a 10,000 word essay on monotheism done for a publication. So I'm doing a lot more writing than reading, but I'm kind of going back and forth. I'm writing, I'm reading, I'm correcting my writing, I'm reading, I'm writing more. So it's kind of both at the same time. CPO Fast Forward, thank you so much for the question. Hi, Dan. Other than Luke, can we determine if the gospel authors read any of Paul's letters? Did Marcion use all of Paul's letters in his canon? So the second question is much easier to answer. No, Marcion did not include the pastoral epistles in his canon. In terms of read any of Paul's letters, I think they were probably aware of them. I don't think that we can make a strong case that they were incredibly influential, though, which is something I think I said just a bit ago. And I apologize for being so behind that people are asking the same question over again. Amanda, thank you for the question. Done a vid on the meaning of witch in the Hebrew Bible. I have touched on the question, but that might be my book of video ideas. I'm going to put that down because there are certainly connections to what we think of when we hear the word witch today, and there are other ways in which it differed quite a bit. For instance, the people talk about the witch of Endor, who was not a witch in any sense, and the word in Hebrew for witch is never used to describe the necromancer of Endor. Time Out Houston, my old church teaches dinosaurs existed before humans and God flooded them in Genesis 1:2. What do scholars say about this view? That it is nonsense. It is just an attempt to take what science now understands about the world and try to cram it into the cracks and crevices of the Bible to suggest that it all fits together as a way to say, see, the Bible is still inerrant. It doesn't have any problems. And that's just nonsensical. Carrie, thank you so much for the question. Hey, Exmo here. Love your stuff. Thank you very much. What's your opinion on Sapiens? What's the value of religion today? Is the decline of religion inevitable? I think Sapiens is a fascinating book. I don't think that the decline of religion is inevitable because it is baked into our cognitive architecture, and the different behaviors and cognitive representations that we group together under the rubric of religion are going to be there as long as there are human brains. And so while the reflective side of cognition is going to, I think, probably be more salient in that tug of war between the reflective and the intuitive cognition is not going away. So the things that result in religion, what we call religion, are always going to be there. And unless we devolve to an authoritarianism where people are not allowed to express themselves, then it's not going anywhere. But thank you for a great question. And value of religion today, it does a lot of different things for a lot of people in a lot of different ways. Some of it is social. Some of it is about community. Some of it is about meaning and significance and purpose. Some of it is about belonging to something bigger than yourself. There are all kinds of different ways that religion continues to function in the world. And so, yeah, it's always going to have value for people who pursue it for those reasons. But it certainly can't be reduced down to a single thing. And that's where I think people tend to go wrong, is when they try to reduce religion down to truth claims. Because in addition to the fact that that's just a Protestant take on what religion is, I would say the majority of people aren't involved in religion because of that, or aren't involved in the things that we label religion. And also, we got to look outside of Eurocentric worldviews as well. In a lot of places, the things that we call religion are alive and well, and are not going anywhere anytime soon. C. Fraser, thank you so much for the question. Hey, Dan, thanks for all you do. I appreciate it very much. Are there meaningful differences between Dead Sea Scrolls Isaiah and Masoretic Isaiah? Yeah, there are a lot of little things. Nothing earth-shattering, but certainly there are differences. I think over 99% of the verses have some kind of difference, although probably 90% of those differences are spelling differences or minor meaning differences. But yeah, there are some differences here and there that are more significant. But once you say that, people are going to say, well, there are no differences that change Christian doctrine or anything like that. And true, but there couldn't really be differences that change Christian doctrine, because Christian doctrine is not downstream of the Bible, much less of the book of Isaiah. Christian doctrine is going to be Christian doctrine irrespective of the text, because it is not contingent upon the texts. And that's something I've pointed out many, many times. Things like the Trinity aren't in the Bible, and the Bible could change in 1,000 ways relative to the passages that have to do with the Trinity, and people would still believe in the Trinity. So meaningful differences, yes. Differences that are going to destroy Christianity, of course not. You could not have differences that big, because there are texts, like I mentioned it before, Jeremiah is 1/6 shorter in the Septuagint, and the Dead Sea Scrolls preserve Septuagint versions of Jeremiah in Hebrew. There are lots of differences in Samuel Kings. There are the Septuagint itself has a bunch of different readings that probably mean they had different Hebrew source texts in front of them, but people just don't care, because it doesn't change doctrine, because doctrine is not contingent on the text. Okay, it's getting past the time I said. Let me try to do a lightning round here. I want to make this worth it for folks who have contributed with questions. My Lord, thank you so much for the question. Dan, if Moses existed and if he wrote anything, what language would he have written it in? Egyptian, and yeah, we definitely don't have anything like that. If he was located where the Exodus tradition locates him, if he were further east in the Sinai Peninsula or something like that, it might have been a kind of Proto-Semitic, in which case it would be something in between Egyptian and Phoenician. But yeah, a lot of that depends on how you reconstruct this historical Moses. But interesting question. Thank you. Thomas Hartwell, thank you so much. When did Trinity become widespread? It's not doctrinal until Nicaea, but was it commonly believed by church fathers before that? I have a hard time figuring out nuance of Martyr or Origin with regard to Trinity. I think Martyr talks... So Tertullian is the first to use the word Trinity, and you already have kind of a subordinationism, but some sense in which there's some kind of sharing of ousia. But that doesn't mean a whole lot, because a different hypostasis from the same ousia is like, well, each human is a different hypostasis based on the same ousia. So that didn't mean a ton when it comes to how we think about the Trinity today. Martyr talks about the Logos as another deity. Philo does the same, says the Logos is a second deity. So they're not yet, I think, close enough to what we think of as the Trinity to say it's the Trinity. But I think late 2nd century to early 4th century, there is a sense in which they understand Jesus as God, and they're trying to work out exactly how to think about it in a way that is philosophically defensible, because that's the main priority there. And yeah, I talk about, that's chapter 17 in my book. So I talk in a bit more detail about how they understand Jesus as God. But thank you for a great question. The Prep Project, are you a postmodernist and or epistemological pragmatist? I'm a cognitive scientist of religion. And so I'm not like a card-carrying postmodernist, but most of the methodologies that I think are the most robust would fall into a postmodern category. Epistemological pragmatist, to some degree, but again, I don't like those labels, just because I don't. If I need to go outside of that methodology because I think there's something more useful elsewhere, I'm going to. I don't have any allegiance or anything to that label. So I think I'm probably more often than not within those methodologies, but I have no allegiance to those methodologies. Okay, we got a number of questions. So if so please stop sending in questions, because I do need to go, and I do not want to leave any questions unanswered from folks who have contributed. Are costly signaling and creds only reason people are religious? No, but it's a large reason that organized religion exists. So not the only reason. There are plenty of people who are religious, even parts of organized religion, who, for reasons other than that, but that is the reason that organized religion thrives, or those are the main reasons that organized religion thrives. I'll put it that way. Donnell Griffin, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Lone Vault Wanderer, 1919. I heard Dan Barker say in an old debate that the earliest Christians and the disciples themselves had originally believed that the resurrection was spiritual, not physical. Your thoughts? Certainly the ones who were a little more philosophically oriented and particularly platonically oriented would have understood something a little more closer to the Gnostic idea that the material world is corrupt. And so salvation is about overcoming the material and rising to return to the pleroma, the spiritual. So certainly there would have been early Christians, particularly the more philosophically oriented early Christians, who would have understood the resurrection to need to be spiritual in the sense of non-material. But so yeah, but Christianity was not a monolith, least of all in the 1st century. Hannah of Omega, thank you so much. In biblical scholarship, what is the difference between a classicist, historian, theologian, archaeologist, and any other categories I may not know about? That has to do with what period, what types of texts, what languages, what methodologies you use. A classicist is going to start from a foundation of Greek and Latin and is going to start with the classical literature. Historian is going to focus on methodologies that inform historical understandings and reconstructions from different time periods in different places. So the language or the specific set of texts is not going to be the priority, but the period might be the priority. Theologian is primarily going to be looking at how we can take whatever it is we're looking at and turn it into theological principles, application for today, that kind of stuff. Archaeologist is interested in the material remains and what that can tell us. So they're most focused on the material remains, maybe not so much on the text, maybe not so much on the periods, but periods are going to inform when and where they're looking for material remains. And there are lots of other methods and approaches. source critics, textual critics. You have form critics, not so much anymore, but yeah, lots of different approaches. I do cognitive science of religion. That's a much different approach. So yeah, there are lots and lots of different approaches and lots of different, and they're looking at lots of different things through different methodological lenses. Orlando Chavez, thank you so much for the question. I've become interested in the divine council and in particular the role of Satan in the book of Job. Any good reading material on this you recommend? Yes. Yeah. Ryan Stokes's book, The Satan, How God's Executioner Became the Enemy, talks quite a bit about Satan in Job. And then Archie Wright's book, Satan and the Problem of Evil, From the Bible to the Early Church Fathers. Both of those are going to talk quite a bit about Satan, and including in the book of Job. In fact, I think Stokes's book has at least a whole chapter. Yeah, so chapter 2, The Satan and the Innocent Job. Yeah, so those are the two. Yeah, those are the two I would recommend. Thank you for the question. Tommy Thomas, what's the difference between came to believe and made up? Well, a lot of different things. Something might come to somebody's mind, their mind has created, but it's meaningful and useful to them, and they come to believe it without consciously deciding, I'm going to, I know this isn't real and I'm going to run with it anyway. I think there's a spectrum between things that people come to believe and things that people make up. And I think it's more common for, I think, authors to make stuff up, whereas it's more common for lay members of a community who may not be involved in structuring power or disseminating literature or ideologies, more common for them to come to believe stuff. So I think it's a spectrum. All right, and last question. Thank you so much, Frank. Do you know how long does it take a religion to completely die out and become solely myth? I don't think that is that is a consistent process that you can quantify and that you can measure like that. And myth is a loaded term that can mean a lot of different things. But usually, if you're talking about the idea that, if you're talking about myth the way that, like, we might talk about Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief or something like that, where nobody takes these things seriously in our societies anymore, that has more to do with civilizational shift than it does just with time. But certainly time is a feature of it. But yeah, I would say there's no consistent way. That's entirely historically contingent, and so has a lot of different factors that contribute to it. And then Hayden says, thoughts on Alan Moore's work From Hell or Watchmen? Alan Moore, Grant Morrison, in a duel between comic book authors who are also wizards. Watchmen was really cool. The movie had some really cool parts. I have not watched all of the series, but yeah, Alan Moore's a legend. Grant Morrison and a duel between. No comment there. Okay, I have to go. Okay, we got one more question from Austin, and this is going to have to do it. Hi, Dr. Dan. Hi, Austin. I love your work. Thank you so much. What is the evidence for or against the Church of Holy Sepulchre being the death site of Jesus? Can we ever know the site? I would say that of all the sites that have been proposed, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre has the best argument. The Garden Tomb is not it. Church of the Holy Sepulchre tags most of the bases. So if we have found it, that's it. But I don't think we can know for sure. We would always be guessing. But it's of all the candidates, it's the best one, I would say. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. I apologize for rushing there towards the end. I appreciate your time and your attention, and everyone who is contributing through the super chat questions. And I'm going to have to try to, hopefully we'll have a couple more of these next week for through the Patreon. I'll have a couple that are scheduled. And then other than that, yeah, I will just randomly pop up. So thank you again for your time. Hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you happen to be. Hope you got people around you who love you. Hope you have enough food on the table and a warm, safe place to spend the night. And I will see you all around. Bye, everybody.